Hello, in this part of the tutorial series on Tinkercad, I'm going to show you how you can use the different tools for measurement and also how to control and manipulate the objects you're working with. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is get rid of the object I had in the previous video, which was showing you how to do different viewpoints so you can see what you're working on in Tinkercad. So I'm going to left click on that object and hit the delete button, or you can hit the backspace button as well to delete it. And I'm going to go ahead and hit the home button to go back to the overview that you start with in Tinkercad when you are creating a new design. Now the first things I want to show you is the grid itself. If you'll look down at the bottom right corner, you'll see something that says Edit Grid. When you click on Edit Grid, this is where you can change your measurements. So if you don't want to work in millimeters, you can also work in inches. You can also change the printer that you're working with so that it actually mimics the printer bed size, so you have a basic understanding of how big you can make your object in Tinkercad. That's actually really cool. You can also change manually the width and the height of your build plane, so it's either wider or tall or further up. The issue with that though is, please keep in mind, whatever you build may need to be scaled in order to be 3D printed. So I can click Upgrade Grid, and now I'm working in inches. And I'm going to go back to millimeters because that's the measurement I like to work in. And below Edit Grid, you're going to see where it says Snap Grid. This means how many blocks or how fine of a movement your object will have in the work plane. And I'll show that in a second when I get there. So I'm going to hit 1 millimeter. That's just basic. And then the next step that you're going to want to go ahead and take care of is get a ruler. So if you go up to the top right corner and click Ruler, bring your mouse down to the bottom left corner and click, you have now the X and Y axis. So now if I go ahead and bring a block or an object onto the build plane, I can start working and building. So you'll see on the right, you can scroll up and down on the basic shapes and grab any one of these shapes and use them. So I'm going to click on a box and bring my mouse to the center of the screen and click. Now notice the ruler I'm using shows the X and Y coordinate of the corner of the box. And notice I'm in millimeters, so these are millimeter measurements you see on length, width, and height. And then over on the snap grid, notice if I move my block to the right, it goes up in increments of 1 millimeter. And if I go up on the Y, it's going up and down in 1 increment of a millimeter. Now, if I click on the snap grid and change it to 0.1, you'll notice if I left click on my box and drag it, I'm going in the decimal movements. So that gives me a much finer control of actually moving the box. So it's up to you on how you want to move your objects. That's one way to control them. Another way to control them is to go ahead on the X and say, okay, I want this to be at 0 on the X, and I want the Y to be 0. So the corner of the cube is at 0, 0, the origin on the X and Y axis. So that's a way that you can control the object. Now why would you do that? Well, I could make a pattern. If I come over to my box and say I want to make like a Minecraft sword, I can say, okay, let's move the X to 10 on the new box and the Y to 10. And that's because I know that on 20 by 20, the middle is 10 by 10. Bring another box out, do the same thing. 20 on the X and 20 on the Y. So that's basically how you can manipulate and control where you have an object on the build plane. Now you can always left click on any one of the objects and move them and put them wherever you want on the build plane. So that's another way to control them as well. If you want to make them all lined up perfect, yes, you could click on this box and say, okay, 50 on the Y, click on this box, say 50 on the Y, and say on this box, 50 on the Y. Well, that was a lot of work to make them all perfectly lined up on the Y axis, but there's an easier way. So I'm going to scatter them out on the build plane. If you left click and drag and highlight everything, in the top right corner you'll see the alignment tool. If you click on it, you'll see the circles appear. Now if you leave your mouse over the circle, it's going to show you what it's going to do. So if I click this circle, it's going to make all of the cubes perfectly aligned up on the y-axis. And then once I'm done, I can just left click. So that was a lot faster than me manually clicking and typing the y-coordinate for each object on the build plane. Now another tool for controlling your object, if I'll zoom in here, is when you click on any object, you'll notice that you'll see arrows on each side of the block. So if I come over to this arrow and left click and hold and I turn my mouse, it'll turn in increments of 22.5. Now if you want to turn in finer increments, I'm by the way holding my left button down on the mouse and moving my mouse. You can go up further, drag, and notice that red line shows you how far you're dragging. This now lets you turn in increments of 1 degree. So if you ever want to change the angle of the object, you can easily do so with the arrows. So notice I was changing that, and if I come over here and drag up, I'm now rotating the object 90 degrees this way and rotating the object back to 0. And then again, I'm spinning the object on the base like so. So that's how you can change your angle of the object, by coming over to any one of the angles. The next thing I want to show you with controlling your objects is you'll see this cone. The cone is no different than the height, which is 0 right now. So you can change this object in the air, put it in the air by changing the 0 to 5 and raising it in the air. Or you can go to the cone, let me go back to 0, and left click on the cone when it turns red and hold your mouse and move it up and move it down. This lets you raise objects if you're building in the three-dimensional space and you need to take your object and put it in the air. So I'm going to go ahead and hit that back to 0, and the object is now at 0. So that is how you use the cone. And then the next thing I want to show you is how you can resize your object using the corners of the box or even the box menu. So I'm going to left click on the plane and notice everything disappears. But if I click on this object, well, this is its menu for that object. If I come over to length, I can click on that 20 and say 50 and notice the length of that object changed. Now I'm going to hit undo over here on the left. One more time. You can also come over to this 20 and say 50 here, and it does the same thing. So you can change the size manually, either with the menu on the shape or actually on the dimensions around the shape. You can even left click and drag on the corner here and resize the shape that way as well. So you got a lot of options with how you can resize the object and how you can control the object in the build plane. All right, so this was a rough tutorial, or just a basic tutorial on how you can control, resize, and manipulate the objects in the build plane.